Hey, Fiends of the Pod, Nate Wyckoff, your host here again, reminding you like, subscribe, and yes, it is hard to come up with these extra little special things for every episode. But like my good friend behind me, Godzilla, I will not stop until every single building in a metropolitan area is destroyed if you don't like and subscribe. Enjoy, and please go to cultandclassicfilms.com to pick up exclusive cult movies, and also you can subscribe and have them delivered at a discount to your door every single month. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to Cult and Classic.
All right. Tad did not give me a thumbs up, so I don't know if you guys heard our theme song, but yes. Okay.
I did.
Oh, love technical things. Well, I can't. So if you're watching this on video, by the way, we have all of our episodes, new episodes coming out on YouTube as well as audio format at youtube.com/@Cult and Classic Films. Why YouTube decided that they started adding at symbols in the links, I don't know. But yes, at Cult and Classic Films. So yeah, pretty great. We have new episodes like this one coming out every Tuesday at the same time as the audio pod, which is 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time every Tuesday. And then we also have classic, never before released video episodes of our old classic episodes every Thursday. So if you join, subscribe, and like our YouTube channel content, you'll get 2 episodes a week that you can watch. It's pretty great. All right, so this is part 2 of our double feature, which I believe I called Japan America. It could have been Japanimaction. I don't know. It could be all sorts of things, but it's a pairing of tokusatsu films, which are effect-laden TV shows. So last week we talked the 1995 feature film Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie. It was a blast. Much commentary was made about Purple Mel Brooks, and fun, good time was had by all. The difference between that movie and this week's is that that movie was based off the TV series that used footage from an actual Japanese TV show called Super Sentai. But the film, the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers film, was actually the first entry in the series that was completely shot in or shot by an American team with American crew, even though it was shot in Australia. Okay, so that's kind of a difference between today's, which is Kamen Rider ZO. Okay, they use the acronym ZO because Japan loves weird, unexplained acronyms, shortened things. I think if anybody plays video games, I know lots of our listeners do. Square Enix with their obviously the Japanese, but with their Final Fantasy series has the most insane. I think one of the Dissidia games was like 6 words and like several letters that didn't have, and they asked the developers what it meant, and they're like, "Oh, it doesn't mean anything. We just thought it sounded cool." And you're like, "Okay." So Kamen Rider ZO, this film this film is got some interesting, like all of our films, got some interesting facts behind its production. It's from 1993, so it's actually 2 years prior to the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers movie, and its runtime is only 50 minutes. The reason for that is because it was actually aired um, as a TV movie, essentially. When Japan productions come to the US, we generally categorize them into like a series, or a video, which comes from the day when you'd actually like order videos through like manga or media blasters or CPM, something like that, when they were in very early morning on Sci-Fi Channel, where it would be like there was a movie, right, which was a theatrical release film in Japan, and then there was a video, which sometimes it would be a 50-minute like mini film. Sometimes it would be 2 to 4 episodes that essentially played that were a complete anime. There were no more of it, and they were actually produced to be that length. So this is what we would consider a video from a Japanese release video, because it aired on TV rather than in the movie theaters. Kamen Rider is not super popular in the US, but it is massively popular in Japan, and we will definitely dive into its origins and its current status among anime, manga, and tokusatsu fans. But first, I am your host, film critic and comedian Nate Wyckoff. We also with us today have Tad Mastroianni. How are you doing, Tad?
I'm transforming.
You're transforming.
Yes.
It's very Kafka-esque in a very anime way. Uh, Mandy, Mandy Longley is also with us. How are you doing, Mandy?
I'm invisible today
You're
for
invisible. If
the
you're watching,
YouTubes.
if you're watching her on the YouTube, her background is present and she is present, but she has
Yeah.
gone translucent.
I'm
It's
I'm
not
in my
only
like it's my like rider was it Zo like I'm in the hibernation mode under the mountain.
yeah,
I'm just
that's
going
true.
very method for this one. Like
That's right. I have to
yeah,
say, like,
waiting for
we'll
the
talk
the
about it,
the
but
watch to click over and tell me
yeah,
to go
there's
rescue
a
children or
moment that
something.
looked very peaceful, very peaceful. So, Kamen Rider, the basic of the series Kamen Rider is that there are a lot of different versions. So, Kamen Rider ZO is sort of its own beast, but they all pull from the same concepts and mythology. Kamen Rider means often known as masked rider, which is kind of the translation, is one of those superhero-y shows where some guy is transformed into a masked, armored superhero and fights really weird, sometimes often insectoid monsters that are in those awesome rubber kaiju suits. However, unlike a kaiju that we kind of are familiar with here, which are like usually very large, right? Godzilla, um, uh, Rodan, lots of Ultraman enemies, right? Where they are super big and topple buildings. Kamen Rider tends to deal with ground level, like the sections of Super Sentai and Power Rangers that are not the final forms, right? There's always a final form in Power Rangers where the monster becomes giant and they have to get their big Megazord Voltron-esque robot to fight it. There's not as much of that in the Kamen Rider universe. Okay, they fight on the ground. It is bug themed. So Kamen Rider is usually sort of grasshopper-like in his costume, big eyes, little antennae, and he usually rides a motorcycle. His designs, I think, are pretty great. And then it also is really about the enemies. Just like Ultraman, the enemies are sort of key to the Kamen Rider series. They're usually bizarre, monstery, lots of special effects. And that's kind of what makes it awesome. They're very action centric, although, especially this series does have a lot of plot. I think in the US, the best thing to compare it to would be Ultraman, right? And the various Ultraman series. So, Kamen Rider ZO from 1993. I'm going to quickly go over the plot and then we'll dive into a discussion about it. So this one has our lead character wake up, as Mandy said, in sort of a mountain cavern that's very enclosed with like it looks kind of damp rocks and tree roots. And he has this like watch thing and it wakes him up. And he doesn't really remember much, but he's supposed to go protect this child. And he gets visions of this child. So he runs to protect this child. And sure enough, a really spooky, disgusting live action Guyver-esque monster is trying to kill this kid, it seems. And Kamen Rider, as this guy in the mountain turns out to be, transforms into Kamen Rider and fights this monster, saving the boy. And the movie follows this monster, actually follows Kamen Rider and the boy as they run away from this creature. It ends up being, you're gonna have to help me with this plot here shortly. Um, it's the monster is actually the creation of the boy's father, and it kind of went wild as sort of a mutating life force. It's sort of like an AI gone wrong story. And then of course there's a big battle at the end, and you know, and Kamen Rider wins. Everyone's safe, and then Kamen Rider rides off into the sunset. It's not much of a spoiler to say that. That is kind of the way that these stories tend to go. Uh, but there's some twists in here. The reason I say that I'm gonna need some help with the plot, it's not even that it was difficult, I think, to follow really. That it's not a complicated plot, but it's more that in full disclosure, and this is not a reflection of the show, I fell asleep partially through this movie, and I so rarely do that, but we've launched our new film releasing, and it has been crazy hectic. If you don't know what that is, go to patreon.com/cult and classic films, and you'll be able to subscribe if you like for cheap and get like really great special edition or standard release cult films delivered directly to your door that you cannot get anywhere else. They're really cool, really low budget, really wild. But anyway, I've been doing that, so it has been exhausting, and I fell asleep. I tried to rewind, which I did, and yet somehow I must have missed various pieces throughout it, and I couldn't make all the connections. So we'll find out how much that is my mistake. And I
I didn't
believe
fall asleep and watched it twice, and I think that I might still have some trouble
I was
okay,
gonna
I
say,
wrote
Nate, I don't think you missed much, Nate.
I don't. I mean, I went back and rewatched some things to be like, I don't know what's going on.
so
Yeah, still don't. Still don't
so
know.
so I think that if I what I piece together is that so the little boy that's being hunted, he is being cared for by his grandfather, and the scientist who ended up being the one that had built the monster that's hunting them is actually it's the kid's father, and the grandpa I think thinks he's evil. He's like, something happened and my son became evil, and like, so he doesn't want anything to do with him. And I believe in at the end that you kind of find out that the dad wasn't evil, but that this creation he did sort of evolved on its own and then sort of took over and started to control things. But it's unclear because we get flashbacks of the dad sounding kind of evil. So I don't really know. And there's probably a reason for this. Um, the reason is that this was supposed to be a feature-length film, and it was being heralded as a new sort of darker take on Kamen Rider. And I mean, it sounded fantastic, but what happened is that eventually the distributor or the Kamen Rider owners got cold feet about possibly losing money on it. So what they did is they said, hack it up, don't finish the rest of the filming, and we will use it as like a double feature for a TV anniversary release. And that's exactly what happened. So the original cut was about 90 minutes long. And I really wish that if anybody knows where we can find this extended cut, let us know. Write into info@coltonclassicfilms.com or on our Instagram or Facebook, Colton Classic Films. So because it actually seems like it would be kind of interesting. There's several reasons they say they cut it down. A lot of people online, or a few rather, were saying that they cut it because they were afraid kids wouldn't be able to follow a 90-minute movie. That's hot garbage. Many films, including Japanese films for kids, are 90 minutes and sometimes more. And this is 1993. This isn't ancient history by most people's memories. So that's just not the case. The more feasible reasoning was because they were running it on TV and didn't want to do a 90-minute TV spot. So instead, they cut it in half and did it as a double feature with another Kamen Rider film or video film, and as they would say on the animated home movies. So that's the story with why this movie feels hacked up. It is hacked up. I want to give some shout outs to some of the coolest frigging monsters ever. The Spider Woman, which has made numerous appearances in various forms in Kamen Rider, is straight up terrifying. I mean, was anybody surprised to see that moment? I I was. I didn't know Spider Woman's character would be in this, and this is not the American Spider Woman. This is a monstrous spider with a woman's upper half, with a mouth that opens halfway through her head and has tons of teeth and insectile pins. Really freaky. Um, I I don't. I think it's funny that there was supposed discussion that the film would just be too long for kids and not maybe too terrifying for kids, because the Spider Woman is straight up. I've heard her called the Scorpion Woman online too, but that's a rarer thing. I don't think that's very accurate. She's straight up horrifying. Tad, did you notice that?
God bless Japanese design and practical effects. Holy
Mhm.
shit. I mean, I sang the praises of Boxer's Omen and its
Mhm.
practical effects, despite the fact that that movie was one of the grossest things I'd ever seen in my life. But it just goes to show, like, the plot didn't make sense for this, but
Yeah.
I absolutely enjoyed the practical effects in this, chewing everything up, despite the fact that this was clearly low budget for the era. And by the way, when I was watching this, I got a vibe. I got a vibe of something that we watched before. I just can't put my finger on it, Nate. It's like an anime where someone goes into a basement, smashes up a scientist trapped in some sort of underground bunker with his brain trapped in like either a computer or
Right.
something.
I
Help
believe
me
you're
out
talking
here.
about. I believe you're talking about the what is it? 8 Man After. What is it? 8 Man something. It was a reboot of a famous black and white anime, and we watched it, and I know exactly why you're having trouble finding it in your brain, because it was well animated but not particularly memorable, but I believe that is the one.
Yes, and you know what else it reminded me of? That ran almost at the exact same time this did in Japan.
Hmm.
Huh, it's almost similar to that whole Dr. Gero timeline from Dragon Ball Z, where someone was trying to create the perfect life form. Funny how that all works out, huh?
Yes.
Just a coincidence, I'm sure.
Yes, yes, it is. This is not a new this is not a new concept. There are so yes, this is why we watch um this kind of tokusatsu, film. It is just straight up awesome action with big practical effects. And in the US, we just don't get enough practical effects anymore. Um, it's one of those things where they sort of were like, oh, 3D. And as we're seeing now with releases like uh Disney Marvel's Ant-Man and Wasp and Quantumania and Warner Brothers The Flash, we're seeing that people are pushing back against what's starting to feel cheap with CGI effects. And of course, we're seeing that there's a reason for these sort of cheap looking, unsatisfying effects that come with 3D right now. And we're seeing it in the way that Marvel special effects artists are unionizing because they're being forced to basically work long hours and turn out a ton of content in too little time, and it leads to these questionable looking shots. For a TV show they would be quite impressive, but for a multi-million-dollar film we really expect more as an audience. And in fact, I unfortunately, I wish I could remember his name, but a special effects man who worked on Marvel Productions, etc., said that the way that these companies typically bill, because if you watch through the credits in one of those films, you'll see like a bunch of different visual effects companies worked on it. It's not just like one, Industrial Light and Magic. It's like a stack of them in the credits. They basically bill by volume of scene instead of complexity of scene. So Marvel production will say, okay, um, we have 96 scenes of special effects that we need done by a third party, who and they just like you're getting your house painted or something, or construction done. They do they throw in wide net, and these companies go to them and say, we'll do it for this much a scene, we'll do it for this much a scene. Well, it makes no friggin' sense, right? Because one scene where maybe a guy is transforming into armor and flying through a planet might be a hell of a lot more intense than the scene where the guy's in the kitchen and in Terminator 2 the guy gets stabbed through the milk carton. That's a lot smaller, a lot less intensive than the planet, yet the time and pay is the same, which is complete madness. It is a money game run amok that has radically ruined our effects. So that was a tangent in a way, but that's why we're seeing this sort of, I think we are seeing in the United States a yearning for these kind of practical effects over
You
CGI.
know, Nathan, we had these discussions back, I believe it was 2014, 2015 when the new Star Wars movie was coming out, and everyone was like, man, it would be nice if we saw some practical effects. And JJ was like, we're going to have practical effects all up in this bitch. And no, he really didn't, especially because, one, we're going to experience a severe competency crisis when it comes to practical effects because most of the people who did it are going to age out, die, or not pass on their knowledge. And
Mhm.
who are you going to pass it on to because there's no money in it anymore? You know, never mind that we've come full circle. It's the Korean animation studio bit from Clerks, the animated series.
Yes. Bear
Korean
driving
animation
car. How can
studio.
that be? Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean you're not wrong. It is it, and I mean hopefully places like Japan where practical effects are more clearly uh they're just more appreciated at this point because they haven't died out. Now, even in 1993 Kamen Rider ZO, there are some three-dimensional effects, but it's wonderful to see that they're not heavily used, right? Um because what we do see is antiquated, of course, but it sort of makes sense because you can make, yes, people like it's more expensive to do practical effects. Kind of, it is. But you have to think about it in terms of, but when you build a suit, yes, you have to fix it. Yes, you have to have multiple copies of it, all these things. You also don't have to involve all of those post-production animation studios. And so there are viable ways to do it. And we're seeing, why do we know that? Because there are really excellent small budget films that are trying to bring it back, such as Psycho Gorman from Canada, which I'm sure we'll cover on this pod because it's a delight. But these things are coming back in a way. And I agree, however, that we have a talent deficit in this country because the focus has moved so far away from it. But, it's clear that the audience is getting bored with 3D, with CGI. And it's not, and I'm sure that there's plenty of progress and improvements that can be made, and beautiful things can be made with CGI. I mean, I think um, Valerian was a great example where the CGI was
Mhm.
stunning. Um, but
You had to
it's
bring
just
up
not.
Valerian.
I did. I did. I
I
love that
just
movie.
I feel I sometimes I feel like I need to rewatch it just because I don't feel like I emphasized when we did our review that I said this movie came out at the wrong time. It was
Yes,
literally one of the worst times for that movie to have come out.
it was. It
Holy
was.
shit.
Can you imagine if it came out before, like right before Phantom Menace? I think it would have been. I mean, granted, it's that's much older, but it would have
Hell,
been snapped up. Uh,
hell, dude. I think even in 2010, it probably would
sure.
have hit different than in
Hmm.
2017. At that
Right.
point, where the MCU had already been running for 9 years at that point,
Yes.
and the appetite for sci-fi wasn't great. Like the appetite for sci-fi was probably higher in 2010, especially
Sure.
because Star Trek was starting to peter out, and someone was like, "Man, I really could use some sci-fi." And then at some point, everyone's like, "Oh well, I guess sci-fi is never coming back."
Well, I mean, we get what we have like little twinges of it, right? Like
We
the
have
same with
Dune now.
westerns. But that's right, Dune, and I urge everyone to see the sequel when it comes out. And if you haven't watched the original, watch it. It's I enjoyed it. Mandy and I talked about it on this very pod. So, okay, back to Kamen Rider ZO. Yes, I agree, Tad. The practical effects are stunning. Mandy, what did you think of Kamen? You watched it twice because the first time you watched it with no subtitles, correct?
Oh, you're gonna tell everyone? Yeah, no,
I
I
am.
flubbed. I flubbed. And I was like, what is this movie that Nate sent to us that is in Japanese, which I do not speak at all, and there are no subtitles. So I guess I will just figure out what is going on by context. Oh, so wrong. Like impossible. Absolutely impossible. Although I will say when I went back and watched the second time, like there really was probably only 5 to 7 minutes of actual dialogue
Yeah,
that told you what was going on in the plot. So it's not like I missed a huge amount for the
yeah.
context. and, and it was still really confusing, and I don't feel like I missed all that much compared to the two of you because you still can't describe the
Yeah.
plot.
The only thing the only thing I think you would miss is the context of what the characters are to each other. Because I think if I watched it
Well, I
without
mean, I
subtitles,
clearly understood that the old dude and the really young kid were Rick and Morty. I mean, that was very
oh,
obvious from watching it
oh,
without subtitles.
I will never be able to look at this movie the same way again. That would make me so happy. Is now speaking of Rick and Morty, of course, is returning. I say soon. That's a in the Rick and Morty land. Soon is a very malleable time frame. But they are doing the Rick and Morty anime series that sort of was inspired by the anime shorts, which if people haven't watched the Rick and Morty anime shorts, they are a true delight. They're samurai films. And you can tell that the love for lone wolf and cub essentially and things like that are ripe. It's beautiful. But anyway, back to this. Yes, the old man and the kid, Rick and Morty, the Japanese Rick and Morty. I am a big fan of that. I think I would have assumed that Kamen Rider's character in his human form was the boy's brother if I didn't see it with the text, because because here's the thing. Of course,
Yeah.
this movie
I
was
just I think
intended.
I assumed it was like he was some kind of superhero. I didn't know
Yep.
why he was trying to help the kid. But clearly like he had information that the kid didn't have.
Mhm.
And um, you know, whoever that kid's like crazy uncle was, they were doing like really questionable science experiments in the backyard and garage.
Yeah, so there's a lot of extra things in this movie that are easy to forget because when it was cut down, obviously, we lost a lot of purpose for them. For example, when Kamen Rider in his human form finds the boy finally, he kind of runs after him. Well, first he saves him as Kamen Rider from the monster, and then the boy runs home and is like, "Grandpa, Grandpa, like monster trying to get me," and he's like, "Ah, get out of here." And so then the little boy runs. Then Kamen Rider as human catches up to him, and the boy's like, "No," for whatever reason. I mean, I guess if a random stranger was chasing me and I was like 8 or 10 or whatever, I would probably be freaked as well.
Hmm.
So the little boy runs nearby in the woods where there's like a martial arts training summer camp, it looks like. um I don't know if it's like the back area of a temple. I don't know what it is exactly,
So
but
I assume that it was like his big brother's like friend group when I was watching
I
it
think, isn't
without
it a
any.
sister or is it a brother? I
It could have been, yeah.
So there's a woman who clearly is supposed to be some kind of female focal character, if this were to go on to a series. And the brothers, they kind of fight, I guess, a little bit at one point. They really just get their butts handed to them, right, by the monster, who is nearly indestructible. Like Kamen Rider early on cuts his arm off and his arm regrows. These effects, by the way, I'm not kidding. I love them. They're super fantastic.
This was
Um,
my favorite monster. Is it
the
had
oh
bat wings for ears. Had like wings that came out
yes,
of its head.
yes, yeah. You're talking about the main monster. I think believe it's called Doris, and he has had other variations in the Kamen Rider series, various series. He basically do they come out of his back, I think, or does he pull them out of his like chest or hands or something? Anyway, he has a spider creature and like a bat creature,
Mhm.
and he throws them and they go to attack the characters. The spider creature, of course, becomes the Spider Woman, which we've talked about, and the bat creature becomes this bonkers bat creature that Mandy's talking about, who is really great. Big,
Oh,
like bestial limbs that grab on to characters and hoist them into the sky. Very, Bram Stoker's Dracula, uh, or
but he has
Last
wings
Voyage of the
sticking
Demeter.
out of his head.
He does head wings.
Doesn't he like shoot things out of his arms too?
I'm
He
gonna
has
be
like
honest. This
things
went in
like
this
shot out.
the characters, the monsters sort of blend together for me, not because they look similar, but because their powers are irrelevant to what they are in some ways. Like
They're not
like the
themed.
main, yeah, like the main villain is, he's a big gooey alien looking creature. Like that's okay, like I get it, like he's a monster, there's nothing else to describe him as, really. But then the other two are obviously spider and bat inspired, and so when they do things, I'm like, oh, like like the Spider Woman drags the girl who's somehow related or to the boy, and the boy into like a pocket dimension of some
Mhm.
kind. That is something, to my knowledge, spiders do not do on the regular. So I don't know where this comes from. I don't know. I don't know what the so it's just, yeah, like you said, and then the bat creature shooting things and having wings out of his head. Just unclear. But the design is great. And the director is credited with actually doing the designs for these creatures. I don't believe he built them anyway, but the director is really accomplished in uh, these films, not just tonkatsu films, but it's Keita Amemiya, and has done, people will who know Japanese sort of anime-esque action movies will know. Zerum 1 and 2 were written and directed by Amemiya, and Cyber Ninja from 1988 has, which is a lot of fun. There's just, I mean, go on IMDb or some other repository of film information that has a good selection of Japanese films. Look up Kamen Rider ZO and then check out the director, because Amemiya has some of the coolest, wildest film projects. I honestly, there's not a single film in the entire catalog he's worked on that I do not want to see. They're just banana sandwich. This film is, as we've talked about, right? It was cut down from 90 minutes. It was moved from a theatrical release to a TV release. And it was, with these characters and the fact that Kamen Rider drives off into the sunset at the end on his motorcycle, it was 100% intended originally to spawn a new series. And this is kind of how they're often done, right? It's basically like an old TV movie in the US that was supposed to spawn a series and never did. It just stands on its own, but usually the end has some sort of buddy set up. That's what this was. And then the studio lost faith and moved on, which is a bummer, because Shin Kamen Rider Prologue, not the same as the recent Shin Kamen Rider film that came out, which we're going to talk about because it's awesome. The reason that this was done is because Shin Kamen Rider had a much darker take on the character, which was always very kid friendly, and it's still fairly kid friendly. I think maybe they wouldn't enjoy it as much, or they'd be scared, but that was a very dark take, and so this was intended to follow that up to make a series with that theme. So why exactly, where the cold feet came from, I'm not sure, but it is telling that they included all of these things that really, of all the things that it looks like they cut out, they could have cut out whole characters that we see and not really have anything affected, because ultimately the thread of the film is that this monster wants this kid. Kamen Rider shows up to protect the kid. We find out the kid's dad is caused it, but also is repentant in some way. I don't know. I think the dad also created Kamen Rider. It's really, I'm not kidding. This is not clear. Who cares? We get to see monsters fight, and it's pretty great. The effects, like there's some, it looks like wire work, like Kamen Rider jumps like crazy, and the effects for that are awesome. I don't know if they maybe did a reverse zip line, and then digitize it out. I really don't know how they did those. They're really cool and they look great. I know that in like 50s black and white Japanese sci-fi films, like what was it? It was released here. In fact, Mystery Science Theater 3000 did it. Prince of Space, which is an absolute delight of a bizarre 50s superhero alien movie. They have this great effect where the villain is supposed to leap into the background, like way up high to like some sort of rafter or pylon in this abandoned building, and they accomplished it by like either hucking or using a line to pull up a puppet, like an action figure they made basically. And because it's going away from the camera, you don't have a lot of time to realize how much it is not a person. And it's a really neat effect. And that's what these felt like, except that they're much more accurate. So I assumed that they were some sort of reverse zipline line work to get it. But anyway, really cool stuff. Mandy, what was your expectation going in? And through your double viewings, what strikes you as talk worthy about Kamen Rider ZO?
There's like, I mean, because you paired this with
Power Rangers.
Power Rangers. I was expecting, I mean, like I was expecting Power Rangers, but like more Japanese, I suppose. So I was a little surprised that this didn't have like more of like a kind of superhero save the day on a mission kind of aspect, because our hero through part of it kind of doesn't know what's happening, and then he sort of
No.
finds out at the end like what happened to him and like why he
was sleeping in a mountain.
Sleeping in a mountain, or that he was even sleeping in a mountain. I'm not really sure he even knew that that was happening until after, like, I mean, he was.
I mean, I'm
over the
convinced that this
weekend
is
and we zip
essentially,
around, right?
yeah, like
Um,
this is essentially a feature length, almost feature length Apple Watch ad, because the watch guides, it wakes him up, tells him what to do, and he has to do
yeah.
it without understanding why. It's like how it
And it's like
yells
a
at me
Dick
to
Dick
stand up.
Tracy watch, kind of, because he's also sort of like getting visions of
Yeah.
like what the watch is seeing, like if the watch was a camera, kind of, and like they're talking about the song. It's
Oh,
I
the
don't know. And then
song,
they
that's
talk about
right.
how this song calms people down. Like it's a special song
I
that like
forgot
calms
about the
them
song. Like I don't
down.
understand the song.
It was just like, chill out. Like, listen to this song. It'll make you not angry. It will save the world. Yeah. So I was kind of expecting more of like, we know we're heroes. We're doing the thing. And then fighting lots of monsters. So we definitely got the lots of monsters part. I was super impressed, like you guys already said, with all the practical effects and all the different monster suits. I also really liked the flat, I'm almost a god kind of monster at the end
Yeah.
that was like, you've created a demigod that is about to take over the world, maybe. I don't know. I thought like the dad, like trapped in like this, his machine.
Yeah, he like merges with
Like,
the machine and becomes like an uber
yeah,
machine.
I
Yeah.
thought that that was super cool. And like, I wasn't really expecting, I was really, I don't know what to expect from the rest of this movie, but like, I wasn't really expecting that. I thought they would find his dad, right? Because it is very
Yeah.
big part of what was going on that they were looking for him. In the 5 minutes of dialogue in the movie, that's mostly what they talk
Yeah.
about, how his dad is missing. Um, yeah, I don't know. It was pretty fun. Like I've enjoyed anime for a long time. I'm very used to the plots that don't really make that much sense and just being more in it for like the visuals and I want to say storytelling, but not really. Like it's more of like
Yeah.
storytelling in the sense that there's like an emotional response being like given,
Yeah, they
like you
do
know,
build
e-
characters a little bit. You just don't, the plot that they're moving
evoked.
through is irrelevant. Yeah.
Yeah, like the plot doesn't matter, but there's still like story in the sense that you're feeling things about stuff that's going on. Um, and there is some like uniformity or like continuation of like the monsters and they're
Hmm.
getting bigger and more epic and like they've got like a similar sort of style to them and everything. So I actually found it quite enjoyable. I mean, it's why I bothered going figuring out the subtitles and going back and like cruising through to grab like the bits of dialogue that sort of give things context like a little bit just so that I could have more appreciation for it and have some idea of what Rick and Morty were doing.
Rick Song and Morty Chan, yes. I
Yeah.
think I all I can think about when I watch Kamen Rider is how much, if these shows permeated American airwaves in the way that they are much more common in Japan, how much more TV I would watch. I mean, I'm not
Mm.
like really like they just don't have, we don't have this kind of, you actually, the closest thing that I could think of is professional wrestling in a way, because the plots are irrelevant. They're super silly. We watch for sort of the bravado and the grandiosity in these goofy characters.
Mhm.
Um, and but of course for me, like we have lots of fans who love it. I know Adam Thorne, who we've had on the pod, Mark Mackner. We talked about his Daisy Jerkins 3 film. They're big fans of pro wrestling. Tad has watched
Mhm.
plenty of pro wrestling. It's just,
And I like how you pretend like you didn't do the same thing.
you know what's funny? I never, I'm gonna come clean here. I never actually like loved, but I did in high school fall in Wisconsin, fall in with a group of kids who were obsessed and started doing their own matches in each other's
Backyard
houses.
wrestling.
Mhm.
But inside, and they would do it to the point like where every week there were card matchups and they'd play different people. And because I had a camera, I was charged with filming everything. At which
Love it.
point I'm like, and I don't know if there were any crimes involved because we were all underage at that point. There were strange things for sure. God knows where those tapes ended up. But so I do know a bit about it. and I do respect it, and I do think it's entertaining. But if they were in the costumes that are involved with these tonkatsu shows, I would have everything on lock. I would just go from one to the other. It'd be like someone who's obsessed with soap operas, just every day sitting down, watching, checking in on all of them. It would be totally my jam. Uh, but anyway, so yes, Kamen Rider. Tad, did you have anything that else that came to your mind when you were watching this, besides the amazing effects, which we all love?
I I really liked the whole subplot once I don't know what that creation was that came out of the vat that started to take the form of almost like a Buddhist goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And then it I really wanted more of that as a subplot because I was like, ooh, is this going to go into some sort of spiritual subplot?
Metaphysical, yeah.
Yeah, and it didn't. And I'm like, maybe the extended cut did, I'm not sure, because isn't that the whole point of watching a mad scientist create something which is supposed to be like a higher life form? It's supposed to go into some sort of metaphysical context, and it deprived me. And I
Mm-hmm.
just the effects were amazing, and it was creepy, but also I felt a little sympathetic towards it, and it did the typical thing that you see in these sort of Sentai shows where everything's either pure good or pure evil. There's almost no in between, and
Yes.
I got robbed. I
Yeah,
still
I
enjoyed it,
wish
but
I did too. I really wish, like I said, I want that 90-minute cut. And for God's sakes, I want a TV series because that would be there's stuff to explore here. Um, Asao is the name of Kamen Rider out of Kamen Rider outfit costume. Doris, like I said, is that artificial intelligent villain kind of thing. And Zio does return in a couple of things in a short, I believe that they're directed where he meets another Kamen Rider. There is just so much content in the Kamen Rider universe. There's even an Ultraman meets Kamen Rider short. There's tons of films, tons of series. They're still currently coming out, just like Ultraman. I mean, it's a big property. I'm trying to figure out why Kamen Rider has not broken into the US market more in the way that um Power Rangers I understand because they had a brilliant market of cutting American footage with the Japanese footage. But even then, we have I mean Ultraman has a strong presence in the United States, even if not a huge presence. It is known, he is known. And I don't know what the deal is.
it's this. I mean, also it could be timing too, because Power Rangers broke into America and became a huge phenomenon. It became a huge cultural force in the early '90s.
That's true.
And then Saban tried to drop in VR Troopers, which I was just thinking of when
Yep.
I started watching this stuff. I was like, oh yeah, I remember watching that too. It didn't hit nearly the same, and ultimately I think it's just that Power Rangers became so popular that nobody would accept a substitute, so Kamen Rider wouldn't succeed.
That's very, very possible. I
Although
think
Kamen Rider did have a Sega CD release in America for
it
some
did
strange reason.
as it's a full motion video game
Of course it
of the
is,
film,
because
of course.
what else was on the Sega CD that wasn't a Sonic game?
Yeah, well, Sega CD did have some. No, you're right. Uh, it
Yes.
had a couple of very famous side-scrolling beat 'em ups from Treasure, but that's about it. I love the Sega Saturn. Okay, so yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we did get some later entries that tried like Beetleborgs. Remember that? Later, like it's things like that. So there were other attempts, but I do think Kamen Rider, I think it could really take off, especially if someone were to take one of the series and do like a Power Rangers, like let's co-film, let's film an American section and then just match it to the footage that we really want to see, the battles and stuff. I actually do wonder, though, even in some of the other Kamen Riders, I do wonder if the violence would be perhaps an issue because I'm trying to think of kid shows now, and I actually for like the age group of Power Rangers, and as tame as Power Rangers is by our standards, we don't have a lot of combat action shows in the United States for kids right now. I don't really know. Like there's a few long running anime, Naruto and Boruto, the spin-offs, things like that, of course, that have combat. But these are almost more aimed at like the Saturday morning vibe in the States. And I just don't know that we have this kind of action-based programming anymore. We're much more in the like millennial humor, talking bears who, use meme speak. Like it's very much more in that vein.
No, we just wait for the every decade Ninja Turtles reboot inevitably that comes out.
We will talk about the new one. I have positive thoughts.
Did you go? You went and saw it?
Yes, I did.
What age do you think it becomes appropriate for kids? Like what age would a kid?
I mean, I could be wrong because my scope is way off anymore. But
yeah, we grew up a little bit weird.
I think it's pretty appropriate. I mean, I don't think there's anything. In fact, if anything, I think it's the safest of the turtles in many moons.
That sounds boring.
It's not. Sure, check it out. I'm not kidding. It's delightful. Anyway, okay. So Kamen Rider, let's move into recommendations. Last thing I want to say, Kamen Rider started in, I believe, the 70s, early 70s. As a show, it has since had tons of other things, manga, video games, as we mentioned, etc. In fact, the United States, there recently was a release of like the first Kamen Rider manga, which is pretty great. It's this nice thick volume, and the art's still like just awesome. So that's cool to check out. There were some other video games that actually made it to the US. I believe there were some DS titles. There was a Wii title. I don't think anything past that has made it to an official US release. There were combat games that look super fun on like the PS3 that you could play, but they're not in English. So any who's-its recommendations? Mandy, would you recommend Kamen Rider ZO? And if so, why and to who?
Would absolutely recommend this to people who are big fans of anime, but like the live action of Power Rangers, rubber suits, or just practical effects. Like you want like something that's not crazy long, that isn't like a big long series, and you just want to get a little fix and be like, oh, I want to see some crazy practical effects that I haven't seen before, because there were some wild ones in this, especially in the costuming. Like, check this out. Like, it's a good one.
Yeah. I'm gonna stick with that too. If you like the sort of Ultraman-ish vibe, Super Sentai, of course, check it out. And check out, there's so much Kamen Rider. Just go on YouTube. I mean, this is available on YouTube. I'm not sure about the rights, but this is available on YouTube. I think it might actually be available from MANDY officially on YouTube with the subtitles. But it sends me back to those early days where you could like mail order anime, on VHS, because it is that kind of short video release that, like you said, Mandy, you can take it and just enjoy it on its own, and that nothing else is really coming out. It's just a one and done kind of fun vibe thing, and it's actually a pretty good entry point to show you what you can get in Kamen Rider universe, and then you'll only get stuff that's more in depth because of the brevity of this entry. Tad, would you recommend Kamen Rider ZO? So why and to who?
I'm a little torn, largely because I think I would recommend it to people who did like the Sentai shows in the 90s and wanted, like, if you didn't see this stuff, I only tangentially knew about Kamen Rider just from the fact that we spent a lot of our youth around anime and manga, going and Anime Boston and all that. Tangentially, I remember it, but I would recommend it more to people who just really enjoy old school practical effects from like late 80s, early 90s, maybe even mid 90s. It's an interesting use case, I guess. You can look and I imagine that there are people who are interested in practical effects who can look at something like this and look at it and go, I think I can reverse engineer that. I think we can build that now, because it's probably easier than ever now to actually get your hands on stuff that you can build this sort of stuff.
With the cosplay community, I mean, there's books on how to use vacuum forming, build your own. I mean, really, I agree with you. Like, it's sort of wild that the technology has never been more attainable for the average person, yet
No one's using it. No one's really
very
pursuing
few,
it.
you know, exactly, except for some cosplayers who really go all out, like the people who rebuilt Ninja Turtle suits and etc. Like who they really could, they learn how to do it. Like you said, they reverse engineer it, you know, get some animatronics in there, all that stuff. So, you know, I think that that's a good recommendation case for this film. I do want to mention one more thing before we go about this movie. We were sort of remiss in not talking about the live action Guyver series. The first one actually has a very small role from Mark Hamill, but they
I
are
watched that one. It was bad.
yes. Oh, I loved it. We'll watch them so you'll see. Because it's a gruesome adult take, and of course, Guyver is a manga and an anime as well. That's very similar. Guy gets robotic alien suit. I think he's an alien suit. Anyway, and has violent combat with monsters. Very much the same style. The movie is a very dark American vibe, and then the sequel is a much more Japanese take, and more hyper violent, but just again, the practical effects are truly delightful. So there you go. If you like this, but you want more of a gruesome take, then check out the Guyver live action films. Thank you all so much for listening. We'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Cult and Classic Films podcast. Please go to cultandclassicfilms.com, sign up for our newsletter. If you're listening to this during the month of August 2023, if you sign up for our newsletter, you're automatically entered in a giveaway for 4K digital copies of two film pack, Rio Grande from 1950 and East of Eden with James Dean from 1955. Totally worth it. Stunning transfers. And I also did 2 episodes preceding this pairing, talking about them both and how they contributed not just to American film, but specifically to cult film in the United States. So check those out. Sign up for the newsletter on cultandclassicfilms.com and join our Patreon for releases every month at patreon.com/cultandclassicfilms. I'm your host, Nate Wyckoff, saying sayonara. And to play us out, as always, is the Chud with All About Evil. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Cult and Classic Podcast. This podcast is important to me, but what's more important are the rights, privileges, and freedom from violence of everyone in this country and in this world. And that means supporting Black Lives Matter. If you'd like to make a donation, please go ahead and visit cultandclassicpodcast.com, where we have a list of places you can donate and help out. And please stay safe.